It sure is nice to come home at the end of a long day and enjoy a podcast. But you know what makes the experience that much better? Relaxing with a few puffs of smoke from my McQueen pipe. At McQueenPipes.com, I was able to find the perfect smoking pipe to suit my nerdy, yet dignified sensibilities. I especially love that each pipe is designed and handcrafted by a true artisan, and that all of their pipes are inspired by fantasy books and movies like The Lord of the Rings. Being a bit of a hobbit myself, my pipe is called the Barrel Rider, but they've also got pipes for wizards, rangers, dragon riders, or even goblins. If pipe tobacco isn't your thing, no worries. McQueen Pipes has got you covered with attachments for vaping or even cannabis. Head on over to McQueenPipes.com and use the code BIOGRAPHERS at checkout to receive 15% off of your entire order. Go ahead. Treat your nerdy heart to something you'll cherish and enjoy your podcast listening experience in style with a McQueen pipe. That's Mac like mac and cheese and Queen like the band. McQueenPipes.com and use the code BIOGRAPHERS at checkout for a 15% discount on your whole order. Cheers, everyone, and happy podcasting.
I do hope you can see me today from where you are.
Ich bin ein Really.
If I'm generally anything, I guess I'm generally miserable.
This modern world of science and invention is of particular interest to women.
The people, I would say, there is no patent. Would you patent the sun?
I regard myself as a soldier, though a soldier of peace.
Welcome to the Biographers.
Shell handle. You think of Pirates of the Caribbean, you know what Jack Sparrow's sword looks like, and like, to me, that is like almost a cooler celebrity than, you know, the actual actors playing in it for some reason.
I totally agree.
And the same thing with those, like, because I mean, what is more iconic than like Drew Struzan's fucking posters, man? Like
Totally.
that is movies.
It
you
really
know?
is.
I don't know.
It is. And I'm sure you know this because it's been going around on TikTok, so it's not like I found some special information or whatever, but I was amazed to learn the little fact in Hook where at the very end when he's choosing the boy to give the sword to, none of the boys knew. Did you know that?
Oh, really?
Yeah, so when he gives it to the little chubby boy and he gets all excited and he like illuminates, he didn't know it either. So like Spielberg, he loves to do that kind of stuff, Spielberg does, where he like sets up these moments where he goes like, you don't know what's going to happen here. So like your reaction that we're going to capture is going to be very genuine, right?
Yeah.
So like, yeah, when he's like, you know, moving the sword around between the boys and they're all looking hopeful on who he's going to give it to, and then it lands on the little chubby boy and he goes, and
Which, by the way, that kid was just the cutest, right? I only wish the best for him now.
I know. I don't know. It was a bummer that he did make him into like a roly-poly.
that was his like, ability. And the fat kid will roll around.
Like, poor little guy. That's not very nice.
I didn't even think about that until you just mentioned it. Yeah, his superpower was being fat, and that was it.
It's like Rufio is like, I can surf on a fucking, you know, wooden tree ramp or whatever. And
yes.
I look awesome and I can do backflips. What can the fat kid do?
Hair.
He can roll at you. It is a bummer.
Oh my god!
But such was the 90s, you know what I mean? I feel like that was just
the 90s were like, you have a deformity or something that makes you look different. Let's play on that.
Oh my gosh. Well, anyway, hello everybody. Welcome to the Biographers. I'm Daniel Newman, hanging out with Akiva Miola.
What's up, y'all?
We're about to get going into, believe it or not, Mark Twain Part 7. Which is amazing.
Wow.
This is one of the longest series we've done, like, ever. The longest one previously in this format was Leonardo da Vinci, and it ended at Part 7. So, yeah.
Oh, yeah, that was a 7-part series, wasn't it?
It was. So, yeah, I'm still trucking along. It'll be done by 10. Like, it will. I think so. I'm making the statement.
9 or 10?
I think it's going to have to be 10 because... Well, you'll kind of see why as we go along, but it's like we're getting into this certain chapter now, and then chapter 8 is going to get into this very important part where we have to kind of extrapolate a lot of information beyond even just his biography. We have to explore a bunch of other stuff that takes up time, but it's really, really, really important. And then chapter 9 is going to be kind of like the winding down, and then 10 will be the conclusion. And you'll see we're going to be covering quite a lot of information between these next few episodes. So like this episode starts out with Mark Twain being 38 years old, and it is 1874, and he lives all the way to like 19, I think like 10 or 12, something like that. I have to check on the exact date.
Wow.
But so he's still got a good bit of time left, you know, and there is still a lot of interesting things that kind of happen in his life. So I don't know. It's important to me to tell this kind of full and complete story, and we're already here, so we might as well just.
And to be fair, this guy's just got nothing but good stories. So like, you know, let's make the good ones long and the okay ones short. You know?
Yeah, and again, to keep kind of drawing the comparison, where I've continuously gone back and kind of referenced the Ken Burns documentary, which again is just called Mark Twain. For anybody that's curious and wants to go watch it, it is worth your time because there's a lot more pictures and you get a sense of it. And there's a lovely gentleman who does like a Mark Twain voiceover, and he kind of does it in this growly sort of southern way, and it's really lovely. But you'll see too that like so much of the stuff, even in the latter part of his life, the latter 40 years of his life, they condense to about an hour and a half. That the more that I've read about him, I'm like, man, but you missed out on this, and you missed out on this, and you missed out on this. And like, there's all these great little things of like, why did this happen that I do think are important. So this will give you a lot more information.
It'd be like with like Tesla if we just stopped at like his high water mark and we didn't talk about the weird space lasers and the pigeons and shit. It's like, yeah, that's maybe not relevant to like his legacy,
right?
But it's kind of cool, you know?
Right, and how it all like how his life winds down, and
yeah.
Anyways, I think a lot of that stuff is pretty darn important. So that's what I'm trying to cover and give all of you lovely folks who are listening to our show here. But like always, just before we get going, a couple of things to say and kind of just give the shout outs to is that first and foremost, if anybody is enjoying the show and you want to give us a little bit of support, you can do so by going to our Patreon page, patreon.com/thebiographers. And if you want to be extra kind and give us a little review somewhere, we would appreciate that as well. Anywhere you get your podcasts, but preferably something like Apple Podcasts or Spotify. That's kind of the two mainstays at this point when it comes to all things streaming for podcasts.
That's true.
All right, you ready to go in here?
Yeah, let's tear it up.
All right. So last time we saw some hard times fall on Sam Clemens. His book, Roughing It, wasn't received quite as well as his first book. His most recent lecture tour was a bust, and most devastatingly, his one and only son Langdon passed away at just 19 months old.
Yeah.
But he and his wife Livy pushed through the sadness, having 2 more children over the next few years. First was Susie, his favorite, followed by Clara. And Sam would also publish his third novel, The Gilded Age, A Tale of Today, which was his first actual fiction novel, believe it or not. In general, Sam's books were continuing to sell well, which allowed he and Livy to buy a piece of land in Hartford, Connecticut, and begin building their dream home. But during his lecture travels and summer stays at Quarry Farm, home of Livy's sister and her husband, Sam would have 2 encounters that shifted the foundations of his worldview and literary sensibilities. The first was with a 7-year-old black child named William Evans, and the second was with a 60-ish-year-old former slave named Mary Ann Cord. From these 2 encounters, Sam's heart would be forever changed, as would his approach to writing about life in the American South. Mark Twain is now 38 years old. Now, by September of 1874, the dream home was 99% complete, which meant that the Clemens family could, at last, move in. It had cost roughly $90,000 to build, and that is about $2.6 million in today's currency, and that was 3 times their initial estimate, but they were all pretty stoked.
Wow.
Yeah.
Just throwing down wads, bro. That's crazy.
Something that I didn't really necessarily write into the script, but becomes kind of evident as we go through the rest of his life. Mark Twain, maybe more than anybody I've ever read about, fucking loved money. Like, oh my gosh. Like, he was a money guy. He wanted all the money to do all the things that he wanted to do.
It's so funny, too, because he was very critical of rich people, but he was like, I hate money. I want all of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think like a lot of people that are raised in poverty, there's a sense of I want to be on the tippy top. You know,
yes.
I want to show you all that I've become something big. I think there's no better example than Mark Twain.
Yeah, I also think he like probably gets a bit of satisfaction of like being the like country kid in the room with like high society being like, I bet you hate that I'm here right now. Like,
I think yes, in a lot of ways. It's funny. I mean, I think we've kind of talked about it a little bit, but he was both beloved by people that he was around, but he was also definitely seen as that like that rapscallion, you know what I mean? Of like, oh, that guy, he's flying in the face of norm. And I don't know, I think people liked it for that reason, but then a lot of people didn't. They were like, dude, this is not cool. So anyways.
You're like Von Westinghouse, sitting at Delmonico's eating your sandwich, and then you see this cowboy over here just like kicking his feet up, and you're like, this guy again, and I bet you he kind of relished in that.
And also, like, he cursed a lot too, which in that point in society, people were like, dude, like they're blushing and telling him to be quiet. You know what I mean? So anyhow, this dream house that was finally 99% complete was 3 stories tall, made mostly of brick in a Gothic style, featuring 5 balconies, 19 rooms, and an absolutely massive covered back patio.
Oh my God. It's an apartment complex.
It's big old house.
Yeah. 19 rooms. Well, I guess like back in the day, like Mary Shelley and them rented out a house that had like way more rooms than they could ever possibly want, because they're like, well, what if we have friends over,
It's true, and they did, but they also used the rooms for a lot of other things.
Yeah.
Now, there were speaking tubes hidden in the walls so that the servants could be summoned, of which they hired 7 to keep up the house. There were 7 bathrooms, all of which had a new modern wonder called a flushable toilet.
Ooh.
The rest of the house was equally impressive and featured swaths of ornately carved wood furnishings and decorations. Sam's favorite room was on the 3rd floor, the billiard room, in which he placed his writing desk, and it was here he could play pool, smoke cigars, work on his writing, and entertain his friends. Their neighbor, literally one house over, was the most famous author of the century, Harriet Beecher Stowe. Yes, arguably the 2 most famous authors of the 1800s were now neighbors, which is cool.
Wow. And remind me, Harriet Beecher Stowe.
Uncle Tom's Cabin.
Okay, gotcha.
The number 1 selling book of the 1800s, second only to the Bible.
Gotcha.
Hugely popular. And in just a few years from now, the house would even have a fancy new contraption installed, something called a telephone. And for those curious, the house still stands to this day, which is now a museum that you can visit called the Mark Twain House. That's in Hartford, Connecticut.
That's so cool. I want to go.
I do too. It'd be amazing. And anybody out there, if you Google the Mark Twain House, it's gorgeous. It's huge and gorgeous, and it looks so like beautifully, perfectly Victorian. You just got to check it out. Now, as they settled into their new home, Sam was struck with a new inspiration for writing. This time, it would be a series of essays about the life and times of a riverboat pilot on the Mississippi. When he proposed it to William Dean Howells, friend and editor of The Atlantic magazine, yes, The Atlantic, that is still being published to this day, he was met with exuberant excitement and was to be paid the incredible rate of $20 per printed page. And that is nearly $600 in today's currency.
Oh my God.
So basically, if he got 3 pages Mark Twain printed, he'd make $1,800.
That's insanity.
Unbelievable. At this point, I believe he is now the highest paid author in the United States.
Including Uncle Tom's Cabin, right?
Well, so Harriet Beecher Stowe didn't really write a whole lot after Uncle Tom's Cabin, and if she did, it wasn't nearly the hit or sensation that it was. But Uncle Tom's Cabin was so immensely successful during the 1800s that she made a lot of money for it, but active writing, there was nobody getting paid higher than Mark Twain at this point. Like,
wow,
$600 a page, even today, if you were working for a newspaper and they said, dude, for every page you have published, we'll pay you $1,600. That basically means if you wrote 10 pages, which I personally can do in, I don't know, maybe a day or 2, you're getting $6,000, dude. Like, that's unbelievable. That's a big paycheck right there,
Yeah.
And Mark Twain, if nothing else, was an absolutely prolific writer. I mean, the dude could churn out hundreds of pages a week if he wanted to. Now, granted, not all of those would be published, but like, you get the picture. The dude was raking it in. He was in high demand. Now, in regards to this whole thing of him writing about his experiences as a pilot on the Mississippi River, for Sam, this was one of those rare times where he felt uniquely able to tell a story that nobody else could. And just as an interesting little factoid, it was also around this time that Sam went to Boston and saw, in a store window, something called a type machine. We would now just call it a typewriter.
Whoa.
His jaw damn near hit the ground when he saw a sales gal demonstrate its ability to type out 50 words per minute, and he bought one on the spot. It only cost $125, which is about $3,500 in today's currency. But as we saw from just a second ago, he could probably make that back up after 5 pages of writing and publishing those in a magazine.
Man, I guess it would cost that much too, like without some sort of system to mass produce them, like all of those little parts and pieces having to be manufactured, with mechanical assistance still by hand. That's like a complex machine.
Absolutely. And especially when you consider this was way before something like Ford came around and created the assembly line. So each one of these had to be assembled by a specific person or two, making the entire thing soup to nuts. So pretty pricey.
Yeah.
But in a few years from now, Sam would use the machine to type out the manuscript for his book called Life on the Mississippi, which is most likely the first time in human history that a typed book was given to a publisher.
Weird.
Mark Twain, again. And by the way, we're going to talk about this a little bit later. Sam, always a sucker for new gizmos and gadgets. And I know you already know this from the series where you did on Tesla.
Yes.
And for anybody that's curious, I might try to wrap that up again at the later in the series or whatever. Just because
I mean, it's such a good story.
It's funny. But anyways, if anybody's curious right now, you can go back and listen to the series on Tesla, and you can kind of hear about that story of how he and Tesla interacted. A little bit of a spoiler alert there.
Yeah, hopping into a gadget that he didn't exactly know what was going to happen when he used it.
to hilarious outcome.
Yeah.
So, we're now rolling into 1875, and this is an important year. In January, a new wave of racial violence began to sweep through the South, instigated often by the Ku Klux Klan, who were none too happy that former slaves were being elected into Congress now that freed slaves were full citizens with voting rights thanks to the 14th and 15th Amendments. Additionally, America was experiencing a second wave of the Industrial Revolution as new machines paved the way for robber barons like Andrew Carnegie, John D. Rockefeller, and Cornelius Vanderbilt to become wealthier than pretty much anyone had previously in human history.
Yeah.
As an example, in 1901, Andrew Carnegie's net worth was around $350 million. That's about $14 billion in today's currency.
Yeah. And it's also important to consider those today's currency numbers only like account for the rate of inflation, not necessarily account for like the ascribed value of an object, which like at that time property was way cheaper. So even if, for instance, Mark Twain's house cost $2.6 million, you might think, oh, well, there's some houses in Denver that like cost $2.6 million.
Yes.
Yeah. But the value of property now is like 10 times higher. Never mind the value of the actual currency itself.
And
so like
labor was cheaper, materials were cheaper.
Even accounting
100%.
for inflation, like you could have a 12-year-old still, work for you for like, $5 an hour in today's currency.
Exactly. Your dollar went way further back then.
So $14 billion is more like, I don't know, $50 billion or something now.
I mean, probably 20 billion plus, right? I mean, it's unbelievable wealth that we were seeing here. Now, for the lower classes, this created a new wealth gap that resulted in a massive rise in alcoholism, divorce, drug consumption, and suicide. Hell, there were even parts of the country that had to create anti-opium laws. And neurologists of the time would then create a new diagnosis of mental health they called, quote unquote, American nervousness, which they linked to the general population's increasing hunger for money, power, status, and influence.
Wow, what an interesting and very different time than now that has nothing to relate with anything that's going on in our lives.
I literally wrote, any of this sounding familiar for anyone? I mean, straight up, a new wave of racial violence, a new industrial revolution, bigger wealth gaps than we've ever seen before, an increase in alcoholism, divorce, drug consumption, and suicide, anti-opium laws, new neurological health diagnoses
being diagnosed,
all stemming from things like money, power, status, and influence. I mean, this is 1875, by the way.
Yeah, that's crazy.
There is nothing new, man. This is all... I was talking to Kat about this a couple weeks back, and I was like, it's insane to read about this, to where we... You know, you'll hear the news over the past 10 years being, the opium epidemic is insane. It's never been as... And I'm like, they literally in 1875 were passing anti-opium laws because it was already an epidemic back then.
Yeah.
Like...
Yeah, and also, like, industrialized poor country and opiums go together like peanut butter and jelly. I'm not sure if you ever heard of China in the 1800s either. Like,
yes.
Like, this is a thing that happens together.
Absolutely. But anywho... This was a lot for everyone to deal with, and they began to dream of simpler times. America was getting nostalgic, and wouldn't you know it, old Mark Twain was starting to feel nostalgic too. Now, Sam had already written about half of his book about childhood along the banks of the Mississippi River, but it felt like the time was finally right to get it finished. So he pushed himself through a massive writing sprint during the summer and spring of 1875. As he pushed through, his primary dilemma with the story was whether or not his protagonist reached adulthood or conclude with him remaining a boy. But he decided that if the main character grew into adulthood, the reader would be taken out of the idyllic, childlike frame of mind that was intended. So he would end the book with the famous lines of, quote, "So endeth this chronicle, it being the history of a boy. It must stop here. The story could not go much further without becoming the history of a man." Summer turned to fall, with Sam continuing to revise his manuscript. But finally, on November 5th, 1875, just a few weeks shy of his 40th birthday, he sent his completed work to his friend, Henry Dean Howells, for a final stamp of approval, to which Howells said, quote, "It's altogether the finest boy's story I ever read." And you've probably already guessed it, but the book would be titled The Adventures of Tom Sawyer.
Dude.
40 years old, by the way, everybody. His first true, like, what we all know him for, he did not do it until he was 40. Yet another reason why I love Mark Twain. He's one of those examples of, like, for all those young people like I was who were like, but I want to achieve that success right now. Dude, it took him till he was 42. So
it's a marathon. It's not a race.
Now, as for the personal lives of the Clemens family, Sam was more in love with Livy than ever and utterly worshipped his two daughters. For Livy's 30th birthday, remember she's 10 years younger than him, Sam wrote her a letter that I hope all spouses out there can relate to, saying, quote, "You are dearer to me today than you were upon the last anniversary of this birthday. You are dearer than you were a year before. You have grown more and more dear from the first of those anniversaries. Let us look forward to the coming anniversaries." He just,
That's so sweet.
Year over year, he loves his wife more and more, which makes me happy.
It's adorable. They're adorable.
And his love for his two daughters was much the same, and he doted on them every chance he got. When Christmas time rolled around, he would spoil them with gifts while also dressing up as Santa Claus and writing them letters in Santa's voice saying things like, quote, "I went down the chimney at midnight when you were asleep and delivered all your presents myself and kissed both of you."
Aww.
I know. He's a good...
That's so
he
cute.
Is a good
That's like
dad.
classic good dad energy.
It is. Now, something I don't write about a whole lot, do kind of know, one fatal flaw of Mark Twain's really is, especially as he got older and older and older, he could have a pretty rough temper sometimes. It wasn't necessarily directed at, like, at his wife or children. From everything I've read, there's no evidence to suggest that he was ever like a person who struck anybody or abused anybody, but he would get pretty pissed and he would go on, like, you know, angry tirades about things, and Livy would have to be like, "Sam, calm down, you know, like, sort of a thing. So again, if there's one sort of fatal flaw, I don't write about it a whole lot because there's not a ton of examples. We'll talk a little bit about some of his quotes and how he get frustrated, but do kind of know that was one of the pieces of him, is that he would get angry sometimes.
Yeah, and I mean, there's no illusions based off of what we already know that he was necessarily like, I don't want to, for lack of a better term, neurotypical, right? He wasn't just like a chill guy through and through. He had his own mental health struggles here.
Oh, I mean, 100%. Like, we've seen the evidence of it, that basically anytime anybody close to him dies, he's like, I was me, I did it. Like, that doesn't come from
that's not a,
mentally super healthy person. You know what I mean? He really had a hard time with death. It's understandably so. It's tough.
Yeah.
But so, we enter 1876, America's 100-year anniversary, which is also wild to think about.
That is really weird.
Like, America was very young by this point. You know what I mean? Like,
it kind of reminds me of like when we were talking about the Mexican Revolution, when we were like, oh wait, the revolution ended in 1920. Like,
right.
Mexico's like 100 years stable. That's not a lot of time.
The Mexico we know today is 100 years old. Like, obviously, it's much, much older than that, but like the government that we know it to be today was more or less established in 1920. I completely agree.
Yeah, we have like a baby country. Like, if you've lived anywhere else, people will say that.
It's true. Anyhow, Sam was pushing for Tom Sawyer to be published in the spring, but like always, his publisher was dragging their feet. To get ahead of the international bootleg copies of his book, which, if you remember from our previous episodes, that was always a problem.
Yeah.
Sam reached out to his contacts in London to have them publish the book for him, but somehow a copy managed to slip through the cracks, and some 100,000 illegal copies were published and sold in Canada, which started to make their way back to the United States. As a result, Sam decided to wait for Tom Sawyer to be published in December in hopes of a second wave of excitement to boost book sales around the holidays. But by August, he was already writing to his friend William Dean Howells about another boyhood book he was working on, of which he had already written over 400 pages. This was going to be the autobiography of Tom Sawyer's lovable vagabond counterpart, Huckleberry Finn. But despite all the nostalgia that Sam was writing about, he was internally conflicted about the sources of his own history. In the past, he had written almost poetic letters to his earliest friend, Will Bowen, wistfully describing the glory days of their youth. But recently, if Will Bowen wrote Sam a sentimental letter talking about their childhood, Sam would snap back with something like, quote, "Damnation, if you will allow the expression, get up and take a turn around the block and let the sentiment blow off you. Sentiment is for girls. As to the past, there is one good thing about it, and that is that it is the past, and we don't have to see it again. Each day that is added to the past is but an old boot added to a pile of rubbish."
Huh.
The idyllic images from his youth were becoming increasingly corrupted for Sam, his memories losing their rose-colored nature the more he learned about the world in which he grew up. He would write to another friend at the time saying, quote, "There is one thing I can't stand, and won't stand from many people. That is sham sentimentality. The sort that makes up the original poetry column of a country newspaper, the rot that deals in the happy days of yore and the sweet yet melancholy past with its blighted hopes and its vanished dreams and all that sort of drivel." I personally think he was starting to realize that childhood was not idyllic for a large portion of Americans, especially for people of color. Pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's crazy to see him have this 180, which, I mean, I think, yeah, I mean, based off of like that speech that he basically wrote and published from the cook, I can't remember what her name was, but
Marianne Cord.
Yeah, Marianne. That was. It seems to have had a really profound effect on him, and what he once found as sweet and charming kind of has like a sickening feeling, which I can attest to. Like, growing up in the country, you know, after my parents divorced and I moved out to the middle of nowhere, I definitely had that like idealized, like, wow, this is just like, you know, the Great Plains, everybody's so nice and comfy and comfortable. And now that I get older, there's definitely those pitfalls that you notice that make it just not as sweet as it used to be. you know?
100%. I mean, it's like, I grew up in Los Angeles in the 90s, and I think back on it, and I'm like, oh, it was a really good time. My neighborhood, a bunch of pals, we were running around playing hide and seek or whatever. And it's like, dude, go 15 miles into the city, and we had things like the Rodney King riots happening.
Yep.
And we had NWA writing "Fuck the Police," and all these different examples of like, this was not lovely for everybody. It was in my little pocket. And I think that that's something that a lot of people come to terms with as well over time, is kind of going like, oh man, like, I'm glad it was good for me, but it's sort of sickening to feel like it was awful for a lot of other people, you know?
Yes.
And I think that is because if we remember when initially there was a point, I think in the last or the episode before, he wrote this, very embellished letter to both Livy and his friend Will Bowen about, remember when this happened and that happened and this person fell in the lake and blah, 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 all these sort of different things. And then it was like a year or two later, that was when he met Marianne Cord and the little boy William Evans. And he started to hear these stories and he just went, damn, dude, like that all happened when I was a kid, basically. Like when Marianne Cord's family was sold off, that was when he was basically a teenager, and I think that you can't help but be affected by something like that,
Yeah.
So anyway, I think that's why
I think he should be. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's why he was sort of starting to get a little tired when people would say things about nostalgia and be like, oh, remember this? He'd be like, damn
The
it.
Old South, yeah.
Yeah. This is not as good as you think. Like, he was very upset by injustice, increasingly so as he got older. So
yeah, and it's interesting because in my head he kind of seems like the Prince of American nostalgia. So it's good to see that he also has that other side of him.
Absolutely. But while he was not working on more important matters, old Marky Twain was still not without a sense of humor. Around this time, he started becoming increasingly interested in, wait for it, pornography.
I was not expecting that, but it makes sense. The second the camera is invented, so too is porn.
But even this is like, not even regarding cameras or pictures. Okay, this is, let's explore this.
Okay.
Now, you would be surprised. There were some shockingly racy stuff being written around this time. Even reading the general plot of a piece called The Lustful Turk on Wikipedia will shock you. And that was not something Mark Twain wrote. It was just something written around that time. It's called The Lustful Turk. Do be warned, if you read the actual description on Wikipedia, it's not sexy. It's disturbing, in my opinion, but it was like this sort of popular thing. Anyways, again, if you are curious, The Lustful Turk, you can read about it on Wikipedia. But for Mark Twain, it was less about salaciousness and more about mockery with hints of debauchery, but always for the purposes of making someone laugh. Now, around this time, he wrote, for fun not to be published, a piece called 1601, Conversation as it was by the social fireside in the time of the Tudors. The whole thing is basically a fake conversation held by Queen Elizabeth, William Shakespeare, Francis Bacon, and a few others, initially discussing the fact that one of them let out a seriously rank fart, but nobody will fess up to it.
It's just terrible Tumblr fanfic, circa 1870.
It's so good. Okay. Now, it's written in mock Old English, and here are a few excerpts that I found hilarious. Quote, in the heat of the talk it befell that one did break wind, yielding an exceeding mighty and distressful stink, whereat all did laugh full for. Then Queen Elizabeth says, quote, verily in mine 58 years have I not heard the fellow to this fart. Prithee, let the author confess the offspring. Will my Lady Alice testify? To which Lady Alice says, quote, good your grace and I had room for such a thunder gust within mine ancient bowels. 'Tis not in reason I could discharge the same and live to thank God for that he did choose a handmaid so humble whereby to shew his power.
So stupid.
To which a frustrated Queen Elizabeth replies, quote, O God's name, who hath favored us? Hath it come to pass that a fart shall fart itself?
I don't know why in my head
Oh my God.
the word fart seems way newer than it is?
Nope.
That's so funny.
Now, it goes on like this until finally, and it's this whole exchange between all these people. It goes on like this until finally Sir Walter Raleigh confesses to the fart, and then the guests proceed to exchange weird sex stories about pubic hair, masturbation, and a man born with 2 sets of testicles.
I just totally imagine him like between like heavy writings just being like, fuck it. And then he just starts just like typing this randomly as he's like just trying to get.
And my favorite part, I didn't really write this in, but one of his really great friends at the time for his whole life was this Reverend, I believe his name is Joseph Twitchell. And he was a reverend. He had a congregation. He preached, okay? But they were somehow buddies, even though Mark Twain was pretty much an apostate by this point, really a non-believer.
Yeah.
And there's this whole story of how when he wrote this, he took Joseph Twitchell on a walk. They walked around together, and he read him this whole thing that he wrote. And the two of them were in tears, just walking together, dying laughing.
That's so funny.
So it was funny because it kind of made me happy that it was like, okay, cool. It's like, I think a lot of times we have this idea of this point in history, everybody is sort of stuffy and uptight. And it's like, no, if you get people alone and your friends, they were all laughing just like we're laughing today.
Fart jokes and dick jokes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, that's been funny since humans learned to communicate. I would venture to say.
I completely agree. I think cavemen sitting around at a campfire and one went, and they went, like,
yeah, literally.
I just think it's one of those stupid human things we've always thought they're funny, you know?
It's so funny.
But as Paul Giamatti's character says in The Holdovers, this is one of my favorite quotes. There's nothing new in human experience. Each generation thinks it invented debauchery or suffering or rebellion, but man's every appetite and impulse, from the disgusting to the sublime, is on display right here all around you. So before you dismiss something as boring or irrelevant, remember that if you want to understand the present or indeed yourself, you must begin in the past. For history is not merely the past, it's an explanation of the present. I just love that quote. And there's no better evidence of, you know, we like to think,
Totally
we've never been more sexually blah, blah, blah. It's like Mark Twain was writing about farting and pubic hair and masturbation and 2 sets of testicles. Like this, there's nothing new. This is so old, you know.
It's hilarious. There's I can't remember what her name was, but she popped up on my feed a couple of times where I think like she's like a professor of like erotic history. Okay. And she would just like pull up clips of just like random 1800s, specifically like the 1890s seemed to have a lot of this, just smut books. And like one was just like talking about anal sex, like crazy stuff that you're like, whoa, huh? And yeah, there's total proof of it. And
she might have even been talking about The Lustful Turk, by the way. Mm-hmm. That one that I mentioned earlier, because there's a lot of that stuff in there. Just saying. Anyhow, Mark Twain intended this to be nothing more than an inside joke with his buddies, but it did eventually get published anonymously in 1880, though Mark Twain would not claim the piece as his own until 1906. So, like, by that time, he had made his literary mark. He's old. He doesn't care. He was like, by the way, I wrote that disgusting piece of literature, in case anyone was curious.
I don't know who they could have possibly accused anybody else of writing it.
That's fair, actually. But finally, in December of 1876, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, I was going to say The Adventures of Mark Twain, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer was published and went on sale. Of the book, Sam said, quote, "It's simply a hymn put into prose to give it a world air." Which is kind of an interesting way to think of Tom Sawyer as a hymn, you know. But maybe not surprisingly, it wasn't exactly a hit. Critics praised the book's realistic look at childhood, the good and the bad, but they really didn't care for Tom Sawyer's devilish troublemaker persona and thought the book's instances of violence were too much for young kids. In other words, they thought Tom Sawyer was immoral, the actual character of Tom Sawyer, and they were afraid that the nation's youth would be corrupted by his character, basically. And the public at large seemed to agree, as only 15,000 copies were sold in the first few weeks, and only 27,000 copies sold in the first year. But do remember the illegal copies that came in from Canada, totaling around 100,000, probably had something to do with the poor book sales. But fear not only did the book develop a massive cult following, but in 10 years from now, after Adventures of Huckleberry Finn was published, Tom Sawyer sales would pick up too. And incredibly, since its publication in 1876, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer has never once been out of print.
Really?
Never once. It has continuously been printed since 1876. It's unbelievable. However, more so than ever before, he managed to capture the minds of the nation's youth and soon began to receive hordes of fan mail. Kids would ask him to send photographs, read their books in progress, or simply ask him if he planned to write a sequel. He read almost all of his letters, but only replied to the ones he deemed worthy, like ones that actually had like backbone. Like he didn't ever want to just like pander to people or like, basically he was like, I'm not going to read your book. Go do that yourself. I had to figure that out too. You know, I'm not going to give you your big break. So all of those that would do that kind of thing, he put into a pile that was labeled, quote, from an ass. And from this fan base, he started to think up a premise for a new novel set in London about two kids who look nearly identical and decide to trade places. The catch is that one is a poor peasant and the other is the Prince of Wales. Before any book would be written, however, he would spend the next year trying to write plays rather than novels, but had no real success. And there is a lot of information about Mark Twain trying to write plays. Some had a little bit of success, but he kind of had it in his head that he was going to be a really great, famous playwright. But his work just never translated into plays because half of it was him describing scenery and like you using your imagination of dialect. It just didn't really work when you watched it as a play, at least not incredibly so. So, he had very, very, very limited success when it came to plays, which he was very disappointed by. Now, one small note to add, however, is that in December of 1877, Mark Twain was invited to a banquet in Boston to celebrate the 70th birthday of a man named John Greenleaf Whittier, who was a well-respected writer of the time. The occasion was also meant to celebrate authors Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, and Oliver Wendell Holmes. And by the way, you can look up a lot of those people's works, but Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, you'll definitely know him because he wrote the poem The Midnight Ride of Paul Revere.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So, very famous guy of the time. Now, as the evening went on, various people stood up to give speeches like we've talked about in the past. But when it was Mark Twain's turn, he stood up and told a very well-rehearsed story he'd made up, which basically made fun of all the people that the night was meant to celebrate. Now, most people who were there thought it was pretty funny, but Mark Twain, along with all of the newspaper reporters, did not. Though Mark Twain was forever embarrassed by his speech, it's worth mentioning, as this would mark the first ever example of a celebrity roast.
I was just about to say that.
So yes, everybody, Mark Twain was the first roast master general.
That's so funny.
And about his blunder, he would say to himself, quote, I am a great and sublime fool, but then I am God's fool, and all his works must be contemplated with respect. Another little nugget of wit that I love.
Yes.
Now, by February of 1878, Sam had grown tired of the States and would write to his mother Jane saying, quote, I cannot write a book at home. Therefore, I have about made up my mind to take my tribe and fly to some little corner of Europe and budge no more until I have completed one of the half-dozen books that lie begun upstairs. So basically saying, I've got all these ideas, but I can't finish them at home, so I got to go somewhere else. So, on April 11th, 1878, Sam, Livy, and their two girls, Susie and Clara, set out for Europe, headed first for Hamburg, Germany. The whole family was loving it, and nobody more so than Sam. This was different from his previous excursions abroad. This time, he was there simply to exist. He had no set agenda other than relaxing, spending time with his family, enjoying the scenery, and doing some writing. But he did have a few gripes. First was the German language itself. And he would write, quote, "A dog is der Hund, the dog. A woman is die Frau, the woman. A horse is das Pferd, the horse. Now, you put that dog in the genitive case, and is he the same dog he was before? No, sir. He is des Hundes. Put him in the dative case, and what is he? Why, he is dem Hund. Now, you snatch him into the accusative case, and how is it with him? Why, he is den Hunden. But suppose he happens to be twins, and you have to pluralize him, what then? Why, sir, they'll swap that twin dog around, throw the 4 cases, till he think he's an entire international dog show all in his own person. I don't like dogs, but I wouldn't treat a dog like that. Some of the words in German are so long, they have a perspective. When one casts his glance along down one of those, it gradually tapers to a point like the receding lines of a railway track." Like, the words are so long. Like, think of a painting, like
Yes.
Greek perspective. He's basically saying that when
Reaches
you
the
look
horizon.
at a German word, yes, it has a horizon point. But eventually, he would write an entire book about his period of time in Europe titled A Tramp Abroad, and in it, he would write an entire chapter called The Awful German Language.
That's funny.
He would list a few of his other gripes by saying things like, quote, "The hated cuckoo clock," and "drat this stupid yodeling," and "church bells are usually hateful things. I wish to God the church would burn down."
Oh my God.
This is a fun one. He also held a special point of hate in his heart for the opera. In particular, a one Nazi named Richard Wagner.
Yo, look at that.
He actually attended Wagner's operas, dude.
And he didn't like it.
Hated them.
That's great.
Hated them. Regarding his recommending Wagner's music, he would write, quote, "Would you advise a person to deliberately practice having a toothache in the pit of his stomach for a couple of years in order that he might then come to enjoy it?" Of Wagner in general, he would say, quote, "Wagner's music is better than it sounds." If you think about that for a second. He's meaning that very literally. He's like, he hates how it sounds. The idea of Wagner's music is great.
That's so funny.
His music is better than it actually sounds.
That's a brain twister for sure. I like that.
It is, but it's so
That's
Mark
great.
Twain, and I love it. Now, from Hamburg, the Clemens family went to Venice, where Livy shopped for all sorts of furnishings to be sent back to their home in Hartford. From there, they went to Florence, Rome, before heading to Munich, where they spent the winter as Sam compiled his notes into his new travel book, which again would be called A Tramp Abroad. By February of 1879, a now 43-year-old Sam and the rest of the Clemens crew headed for Paris. He kept writing, but Paris gave him the lovely gift of dysentery, which kept him in bed and on the toilet for 5 weeks.
Yeah. If you listen to the General Alexander Dumas episode, you'll know why.
Yes. Now, he didn't much care for Paris, and of the French, he would write, quote, "The French are the connecting link between man and the monkey." But finally, the whole family was missing home, so on September 3rd of 1879, they packed up and hopped on a steamship bound for New York. They had been gone for 17 months. Long time.
Yeah.
In that time, Susie turned 6, Clara turned 4, Sam's hair turned gray, and Livy had turned pregnant. In general, they were also kind of going broke. Their extravagant spending combined with Sam's poor book sales were pretty much to blame here.
Gotcha.
Now, once back in the States, Sam was invited to give a speech in Chicago honoring Ulysses S. Grant and the Army of the Tennessee, which Grant had commanded during the Civil War. Now, Sam was nervous, as his last speech at that banquet we talked about earlier, it was still kind of haunting him. But Grant was something of a hero to him, so he said yes. After a festival in Chicago, which included an 80,000 soldier parade, Sam sat in a banquet hall alongside Ulysses S. Grant, William Sherman, who we talked about as well. He was the scorched earth general who was from the land to the sea. That was William Sherman, and another kind of a host of different Civil War heroes. Now, he was asked to be the grand finale of Toastmakers at the event, and he was starting to sweat. It was around 2 a.m. that the final toast was given before Sam was up. Everyone before him were not humorists and had given respectful, serious toasts. The theme of Sam's toast was babies. Hear it out. Now, he started his speech by saying, quote, "We have not all had the good fortune to be ladies. We have not all been generals or poets or statesmen. But when the toast works down to the babies, we stand on common ground." See where he's going, maybe?
No.
Hear it out. He proceeded with his speech, making the analogy that all of the veterans were once just babies. But there was still a sense inside each and every one of them that they were all just grown children who were called by honor, who had fought bravely. The crowd knew exactly what he was saying, and they were with him, laughing at his points of humor and cheering at his points of praise. His speech was building up to a crescendo, which he knew would either make or break the entire thing, as he began talking about babies in cradles and what they would one day become. He said, quote, "Among the 3 or 4 million cradles now rocking in the land are some which this nation would preserve as sacred things, if we could know which ones they are. In one of those cradles, the unconscious Farragut," he was a hero of the Civil War, "the unconscious Farragut of the future is at this moment teething. And in still one more cradle, somewhere under the flag, the future illustrious commander-in-chief of the American armies, he is so little burdened with his approaching grandeurs and responsibilities as to be giving his whole strategic mind at this moment to trying to find out some way to get his big toe into his mouth." An achievement which, meaning no disrespect, the illustrious guest of this evening turned his entire attention to some 56 years ago. The room went silent.
No.
Where was he going with this? He basically just talked about Ulysses S. Grant sucking on his big toe, and it kind of felt like a dig. But drawing on his unique gift for stage presence, Sam stayed silent, letting the room soak up the awkwardness for a good 10 or so seconds before finally saying, quote, "And if the child is but a prophecy of the man, there are mighty few who will doubt that he succeeded." The room went fucking nuts. There was laughter, cheering, shouting, and for a full hour, hundreds of people approached him, clapping his shoulders and telling him his speech was the highlight of the evening. Sam would write to Livy about his crowning achievement for the night by saying, quote, "And do you know, General Grant sat through 14 speeches like a graven image, but I fetched him. I broke him up utterly. He told me he laughed till the tears came and every bone in his body ached. And do you know, the biggest part of the success lay in the fact that the audience saw that for once in his life he had been knocked out of his iron serenity." He basically was like, dude, I got General Grant to laugh so hard that he cried and his body hurt.
Yeah.
That's like the crowning achievement of my life, basically. Because he was known for this very, stern resolve. I mean, he was a Civil War general, right? And by the way, this event would forge a bond between Grant and Twain moving forward. But we'll talk about that later. Now, we're entering the 1880s, possibly the biggest decade of Mark Twain's career. He's now 44 years old. In early March, he finished his latest book, which was all about his travels through Europe over the past year and a half, the aforementioned Tramp Abroad. Sales were decent, pushing some 62,000 copies in the first year, but that number still wasn't quite what he was expecting, but it was still pretty good. Made pretty good amount of money with it. Mm-hmm. The book was his most rage-fueled yet. At least, that's how reviewers saw it. Modern critics would place it in the pantheon of great complainer comics, like Lewis Black, Jerry Seinfeld, Larry David, or even Bill Burr, right? It's of that ilk, right? The rage and annoyance was the source of the humor, but most people just didn't get it yet. He was ahead of his time. And maybe spurred on by the decrease in his book sales, he started to look once again into the world of invention, investment, and getting rich quick. We talked about that a while ago. Remember, in the, I think, second episode or third episode, something like that.
Yes. He is a sucker for little gadgets and gizmos, and he would have loved Shark Tank.
Oh my God, yeah. He would have been like every season, he would have been on there with something new.
Well, I think this rubber ducky is fantastic.
Pretty much, yeah. Now, I mentioned a while back, I wrote this in, that he always had a soft spot for get-rich-quick schemes, but now he was starting to look to modern inventions, and he loved gadgets, as places to invest his money, thinking this would be the way he could become certifiably, quote-unquote, rich. The invention that currently caught his eye was something called the kaolatype, which was supposed to revolutionize the process of printing illustrations. A buddy of his from the Quaker City voyage, if you remember, that was the Innocents Abroad, he actually owned the patent. So when Sam was approached about investing, he purchased 800 of the 1,000 shares at a cost of $20,000. It's about $630,000 in today's currency. His next investment was something called the Page typesetting machine, which promised to do the work of 4 typesetters in a fraction of the time. This was obviously near and dear to Sam's heart, so he invested another $5,000. That's about $160,000 in today's currency. Over the next year, he would pour another $78,600 into various investments, roughly $2.5 million in today's currency.
Wow.
And none of his investments would ever yield any profit and would only push him towards financial ruin.
Yeah, I mean, that's the cost of his house that he just put into investments for things that I don't know about. I don't remember the typesetting machine.
Correct. Yeah, blunders. He was not a good businessman. This is that age-old thing of, like, stay in your lane. He was not staying in his lane.
Yeah.
Now, in July of 1880, the Clemens' third and final child would be born, whom they would name Jane Lambton Clemens, or Jean for short. That's what they called her all the time. The pregnancy was once again tough for Livy, but Jean was born weighing 7 pounds, was healthy, and Livy started to recover quickly. So good news there. Since the beginning of the year, he had been working on his next book, which he had been inspired to write a year or so ago prior when he was in England. That was kind of where the first thought of it was. Then he got all these messages from his fans, and that was another inspiration. But by October, he was putting the finishing touches on The Prince and the Pauper. Classic. It would speak to a lifelong obsession that Sam had with the ideas of what a person is born into and how things might be different for any single human were they born into different circumstances. And just as a small aside, a few months after this, Sam was asked to speak at an event in West Point, New York. And on the train with him was none other than General William Sherman, the general we just talked about.
Yeah.
Probably inspired by his most recent novel, Sam convinced General Sherman to swap clothing at various stops along the way just to get the crowds riled up.
That's funny.
And I just had to include this because the thought of Mark Twain wearing General Sherman's uniform, the general who led a scorched earth march to the sea campaign, and he wearing Mark Twain's classic all-white suit is just amazing to think about.
That's hilarious. Once again, Bugs Bunny. Like, that's
straight up
some Looney Tunes shit.
100%. But anyways, in December of 1881, The Prince and the Pauper was published. Unlike anything Mark Twain had ever written before, The Prince and the Pauper was written with true professionalism. It was polite for a change and made clear points about birthrights, appearances, the antiquated notions of monarchy, and the laws that afflicted the poor and benefited the wealthy. Critics and readers alike could hardly even believe it was written by Mark Twain. But despite being critically well received, it was one of his worst-selling books yet. And though specific sales figures have been lost, strangely, it's estimated that only 10 to 20,000 copies were sold in the first year. Super low. And Sam was really frustrated. So he continued on with his dealings as a terrible businessman, and 1881 rolled into 1882. As the new year turned, Sam had reawakened an idea he had had several years earlier, taking a riverboat trip from St. Louis to New Orleans, then back again along the Mississippi River. The trip was intended to yield two outcomes. First, reconnect Sam with his glory days as a steamboat pilot, and second, to inspire his next literary endeavors. It was on April 20th, 1882, that Sam set out from St. Louis, and in no time at all, he was back in his happy place. The serenity of the Mississippi stirred his soul to poetic depths, and he was even granted the honor of piloting the ship completely alone for a time.
That's cool.
He sat on the deck as he listened to the leadman shout out depths, unknowingly calling out his name, Mark Twain, which he was like, oh, this is crazy.
Yeah.
He even actually saw a ship at one point called the Mark Twain, which is
really
cool. Yeah. He was sailing, he saw one docked, and he was like, oh my God, it's called Mark Twain. It could be a reference to him. It could also be a reference to the depth, but it didn't really matter. He was just like, wow, this is crazy. As he made his way down south, he stopped in Memphis, the city where he sat next to his brother Henry as he died. He took careful notes about the various dialects everywhere he went, specifically noting how black folks would speak, like, quote, "Laws bless you, honey, you ought to seen that moon before the wall." And it's spelled in these very strategic, specific ways. So instead of writing that, it would be D-A-T. Instead of writing before, it was B''F''O'. Instead of war, W-A-R, it's W-A-W.
Yeah,
so
like
he was
indicate inflection.
Exactly. He's capturing, because you have to remember, he had spent so much time in the North that he was almost forgetting really how former slaves in the South spoke. And so he was like, oh my God, I completely forgot. And he started to write it all down. Eventually, the trip came to an end in St. Louis. But at the last minute, Sam decided to make one more stop, again heading south to his hometown of Hannibal, Missouri. He would later write, quote, "Everything has changed in Hannibal, but when I reached 3rd or 4th Street, the tears burst forth, for I recognized the mud. It, at least, was the same old mud, the mud that Annie MacDonald got stuck in." He spent 3 days in Hannibal, and something deep within him was stirred, as he was reminded of all the old stories and faces of his youth. And from this trip, he would write a note that has quickly become a favorite of mine, sounding like something between a Shakespearean prose and a haiku. He wrote, quote, "Birds singing here at sunrise, foliage green in the distance, walls of forest near at hand paling gradually with the distance and vanishing. The first blush of the rising sun out on the overflow was pink, then purple, and the reflections in the water still beautiful." Ooh.
I'm right there.
Oh,
I'm right there.
That's what I'm saying. Like, he has this gift for, like, he doesn't have to say too much for you to be like, I know exactly what you're talking about. Like,
Yeah, I'm right there.
And this is one of the reasons that, like, I really wanted to spend more time on stuff like this, is because I think a lot of times modern sort of ideas of Mark Twain are like, you know, oh, Tom Sawyer's silly, here's his weird adventures of this and this and this. But it's like, it's those types of beats and moments that are just like, the guy was a masterful writer. Not just when it came to humor, he actually was gifted with words and how he just processed the world around him and how he could put that onto paper, you know?
Yeah. I think we talked about this in a previous episode, but kind of like with him and Da Vinci, it's about not necessarily like some level of genius, but some level to really stop and actually ponder the mundane things that all of us feel.
Yeah.
Because the fact that his writings inspire a feeling in me indicates that I've felt that way before. I just haven't sat down to think about it, sat down to write about it, sat down to try to capture the essence the way that he did, you know?
Completely agree. Now, the trip had done its job. Sam fell in love with the river once more, becoming more connected with his past than ever before, and inspiration was now flowing through his veins. But even more than that, he had walked away from the trip with a different interpretation of the South. After hearing stories from people like Marianne Cord, he couldn't help but see his entire childhood as something flawed and riddled with contradictions. He was mad at the South for all of the injustices carried out upon slaves that as a child he was just too young to understand. He thought back to the story of his friend Tom Blankenship, whose brother had tried to help a runaway slave camped out on an island, only to be discovered by slave hunters and was subsequently brutally murdered. He wanted to right some of these wrongs, but how? He would soon compile his notes into a travel book of sorts that is widely considered one of his best works, called Life on the Mississippi, also serving as a small autobiography. But most importantly, from his trip up and down the river, Sam would walk away with a renewed passion for continuing on with, and adding to, a work he had left untouched for almost 7 years. From this trip, Mark Twain would pick back up his old work-in-progress manuscript that, unbeknownst to him, would not only be his magnum opus, but one of the single most important pieces of American literature ever written, Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. And that's where we'll pick back up for part 8 of Mark Twain.
Incredible. Absolutely incredible. I'm very excited to hear more about Huck Finn because, I mean, that is the quintessential book. I know a lot of people like Tom Sawyer. The way that people equate it seems to be like, Huck Finn is Lord of the Rings, whereas Tom Sawyer is a little bit more like
The Hobbit.
Yes, The Hobbit.
That is, I've never heard that analogy. It's perfect. Mm-hmm. It's like Tom Sawyer is this, it's like Mark Twain kind of says it, it's like this hymn that's written into prose to give it this kind of world air, you know?
Yeah.
But we'll talk about this for a good bit in the next episode. I think I have like over a page and a half written that's all just about the story of Huck Finn, why it's important. I stole a bunch of quotes from, fully admitting it, from the Ken Burns documentary, where he basically very wisely gets actual people of color to talk about Huck Finn rather than just a bunch of white people being like, let me tell you why this is important to anti-slavery.
Yes, exactly.
So all the quotes that I'm going to reference are from various people of color who are actually giving insight into why they believe Huck Finn was significant and important and what it spoke to. So like reading Rainbow, don't take my word for it.
Yeah.
And I wanted to make sure, because I do think that is important to give that distinction and everything. But we get into a lot of Huck Finn in the next episode, and again, why it's important. And if anybody was really curious, if you have Spotify, the audiobook of Huck Finn is free on there. Mm-hmm. So you can go listen to it.
I'm pretty sure on Audible it is also free, and I can't remember if it's Elijah Wood or Nick Offerman reads it, and one of them reads Tom Sawyer, the other one reads Huck Finn, and both are fantastic. I listened to it when I was preparing for your season.
I did not know
and
that.
both of which I believe are free on Audible.
Cool.
So.
Well, then there you go. No excuses, everybody. But yeah, it is really good. Huck Finn's very important. Tom Sawyer is great. It's kind of the gateway into it all, and it's probably more friendly for the nation's youth, so to speak, especially like, I don't know about all of y'all out there, but for me personally, I remember when we had to read Tom Sawyer. I think it was maybe in 8th or 9th grade, something like that. It was,
for some reason we skipped that one in my school. I don't know why.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, you and I have like 10 years between us, so it might have even been that in that time they said, no, we can't read this one anymore.
Well, no, my sister did, and she went to the same school as me. I just think that year they picked something different.
Interesting.
I think they picked something by Elie Wiesel instead.
Is it Wiesel? I always thought it was Weissel.
No, it's Wiesel.
Okay.
It's a German W.
Oh, fair enough.
Yeah.
So anyhow, we'll get into that important kind of stuff or whatever. But you can kind of see that even in this episode, there's an acceleration of storytelling because so much of his years now are being occupied by just like being a dad, writing books, finding investments. It's a lot of that kind of stuff rather than like in his youth, he was like, I'm going out west and like, I'm going to save my buddy and then camp out in the hills. Like, it's just all this weird, like funny stories or whatever. So that's why you can kind of see the acceleration of how this is happening.
There's sort of like a coziness to this last episode that I liked.
Yeah.
I don't know how to describe it, but you know what I'm talking about. There's a coziness to it.
For sure. And it's also, I think it's finally getting to this point where Mark Twain is now a genuine celebrity. So like anywhere that he goes throughout really this whole period, it's like people knew who he was. He was a famous enough author. There had been enough pictures of him, enough illustrations of him in magazines and newspapers that people like and he was so distinct looking. Anywhere he would go, people would be like, dude, you're Mark Twain. Yeah. And it became this bigger thing, you know? He was one of the first true instances of a genuine, like, bona fide celebrity in the United States.
Yeah.
Which is wild to think about.
Yeah. I don't know why, but that just reminded me of the Robin Hood Men in Tights. Like, Robin Hood is beating the archery contest. And like, really? He kind of looks like Mark Twain. You remember he's in the costume?
That's true. He does. That's funny. God, I got to watch that movie again. It's been way too long.
Yeah,
I feel like it should be like a yearly event because it's so fun. It makes me laugh every single time.
Yeah.
Anyhow, lots of cool stuff. And hopefully you're kind of you're starting to see too. I'm definitely going to mention this at the very end of the series, but for anybody that doesn't know, the biggest award for comedians that they can receive currently in modern times is called the Mark Twain Award. People like Conan O'Brien have received it, Will Ferrell, Julie Louis-Dreyfus, stuff like that. They've received this award. And hopefully you're getting to this picture now of being like, okay, through things like the Gilded Age, he was pretty much the first person ever to write about political satire. He wrote silly, disgusting, quote-unquote pornographic comedy pieces about who let one rip.
Yes.
Right? In a way that actually made you kind of laugh. He was a great orator, so he would get up and give these amazing lectures that would crack people up. He would give speeches and toasts that would crack up the most stone-faced people. It would go on, and he was just, that was what he was known for. He was the first true humorist ever really in history. He was known as being a funny person.
And most especially in America. I mean, he set the tone for American comedy.
100%. So hopefully you can start to see why. He was the first person to roast, for God's sake, right?
Yeah.
At a big event. So you can kind of start to see why. It's like the list of comedic achievements that this guy founded. You can see why now something like the Mark Twain Prize is labeled so, because he was so prolific in the world of developing American comedy. You know? And for me personally, Kakiva, you know this, but I'm a massive comedy fan, and maybe my favorite thing I can do in life is make somebody laugh. So hearing about this guy starting out as like, I don't know what I'm going to do with my life, and then turning into a person who's like, I professionally make people laugh. Dude, what? Like, he literally invented that as a career for himself, which is just amazing. You know, it's like, absolutely unbelievable. So I've been loving Mark Twain. Did I tell you I've decided I'm going to get a Mark Twain tattoo?
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Any idea as to what?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I've been on this big American traditional kick, right? So I'm going to do like a bust style portrait of him, kind of like looking 3/4 angle. And then I'm going to have like, you know, the traditional kind of like flowers or leaves around him on the sides, and then ribbons. And I'm thinking of what I would write, have it like written above and below, but I'm thinking of having it write, "The truth is stranger than fiction."
I like that.
But I'm still toying with it or whatever, and that won't be...
It could also be just like, think of the dumbest Mark Twain quote as well, and that would also, I feel like, totally sell it.
You know? Totally. So I'm still trying to figure it out. I'm even a little bit of a spoiler here, but there's another... I won't even say it. There's a quote from Huckleberry Finn that we'll talk about in the next episode that I'm thinking that might even be what
you place there.
What I'll place there, because it's massively significant and beautiful, and something that resonates with me too. So anyway, he's become that important to me that I'm like, this is my dude right here. Imperfect, obviously, as all of our characters are, but like, I don't know that I've ever loved any one of my subjects more than I've loved Mark Twain.
Dude, I gotta say, like I said, this is going, I think, in the Hall of Fame for all of our biographies for years to come. Just incredible material, and also I think really well suited for you too. I think you two have a chemistry that works well.
I completely agree, and I think one of my favorite things is that I continue to laugh the more that I get into him. Like, from beginning to end, I continue to find these things that he wrote that are just like, that is hilarious. I still think back to that quote from, I think it was the last episode, where he's like, you know, we held our baby down as...
Oh, yes, and chopped her and sawed her head off or something like that.
Oh my gosh, it's so macabre and so messed up, but it's hilarious for that reason. It's like, you're not supposed to say that, dude, and it's hilarious. So
that's great.
Anyways, I think we've probably gone on long enough here, everybody, so we'll let you
Fair
all
enough.
go. Really do appreciate y'all listening, tuning in. Hope you're enjoying the series so far. Again, if you want to support us, you feel like giving us a couple of bucks, you can do so by going to our Patreon page, patreon.com/thebiographers. Any questions, comments, corrections, you can shoot us an email at thebiographerspodcast@gmail.com. We've actually gotten a good amount of correspondences recently, too, so if you have any questions or requests or whatever it might be, shoot them our way.
Totally.
I'm going to say this on the recording. Akiva, Kira, one of our devout listeners, she has promised that she's going to make us cookies and send them to us. So Kira, get on it. You know my I already told her my favorite, which is oatmeal chocolate chip. What is your favorite cookie?
I like the no-bake peanut butter cookies. Do you ever have those like around Christmas?
No-bake.
Those are like the best. Yeah, you never. It's very similar. It's like an oatmeal with like peanut butter and chocolate. It's the best. But I will also go with an oatmeal chocolate cookie because I don't know. Just oatmeal seemed like the boring cookie as a kid, but then when you get older, you're like, there's nothing better.
I've always loved oatmeal cookies. I know this is very divisive. Some people are like, oh, those are disgusting. I love raisins. I don't care. Fight me.
I love raisins.
Oatmeal raisin, great cookie.
Yeah.
Go away.
It's a great... Okay, I will say as a kid, I was like, oh, I want chocolate chip. But now, like, I can have a chocolate chip if it's, like, thin and crispy enough. But if it doesn't have that, like, that texture, I'm going oatmeal every time.
See, I still love chocolate chip cookies. But oatmeal, I love. And then when you... Look, raisins are great, but chocolate's better. So when you combine those two and you say oatmeal chocolate chip, now we're cooking with gasoline. Like,
yeah. You know what? Honestly, if she doesn't want to make two different types of cookies, I will just hang with the oatmeal, man. That's fair. That's killer.
That is fair. So, Kira, waiting on them cookies, girl. I want them. But last couple of things. Again, if anybody wants to write a nice, kindly review, we would appreciate that as well, like we mentioned at the beginning of the episode. Last but not least, Akiva, what do you got for us on the world of metal?
Yes. Okay. So, metalworkbymiola.com. If you use the code biographers at checkout, you will get 10% off your order. As far as holiday orders go, by the time this episode airs, you will have maybe 1 week to put in an order if you're hoping to get it in by Christmas. I just got, blessedly, a bunch of orders from Element Knife Company here in Denver, so my hands are getting pretty full, but I definitely have room for maybe 3 or 4 more knives. So if you want something for a loved one for the holidays that isn't some garbage from Amazon, go to metalworkbymiola.com. Use the code biographers at checkout for 10% off, including any custom commissions. As far as learning how to make knives, hardyandfuller.com here in Denver. If you want to meet me, we can talk biographers during our lunch break. You can learn how to make knives. We get into the history of it as well. It's pretty interesting. We've got all sorts of stuff on the website, so check out Hardy and Fuller as well.
Perfect. All right, everybody. Well, we'll wrap it up there. Thanks again so much for listening. And do remember, like always, ignorance is not stupidity. It is the absence of knowledge. And I do hope you all learned something today.
See ya.
You've been listening to The Biographers. For more information, please visit thebiographerspodcast.com.